Right. So this evening we're going to look at the Pratitya Samutpada. Pratitya Samutpada. I like the way that sounds. It's translation of it's the translation of that Pratitya Samutpada is the 12-fold chain of cause and effect, or dependent co-arising. So I'm going to kind of make this more of a discussion talk than me just talking. First thing I want to share is the question of how do we contextualize, how do we place the Pratitya Samutpada in context. Basically, it's about cause and effect. If X happens, then Y is going to happen. That's the most simplistic way to think about cause and effect. That's what Pratitya Samutpada is about, cause and effect. It's scientific in nature, and as such, it's not in conflict with scientific methods at all. It's not in conflict with science at all. It's a way of understanding the cause of suffering, right? So the first noble truth of the Buddha is that there is suffering. And Pratitya Samutpada is about the second noble truth, that there is a cause of suffering. So when we look at the 12-fold chain, we can see, we can identify where suffering manifests in that when we break it down. And Pratitya Samutpada also has implications for the third noble truth, for the end of suffering. The question is, are we fed up enough with our lives to want to understand the causes of suffering? Are we fed up enough with our lives? And I want to start with a short story about a medical doctor. This is back in ancient China, who treated patients who were wounded in battle. So these were soldiers. And he observed them after being healed. He would observe them go right back into the battlefield, only to be wounded again, or perhaps even killed. Witnessing this, he began to grow weary of his vocation. Why, he wondered, do I do this job if my patients just return to do the same thing? They just return again to hurt themselves or injure them, have themselves injured again. And this caused the doctor to reflect deeply, so much so that he left his work for a period of time and entered a monastery. It's kind of like that. We need to be like the doctor who witnesses the futility of our actions. We need to be in that place for Pratitya Samutpada to even be considered or made sense out of. We often think we're doing good and going in the right direction, but sometimes we don't see any real effect or results of our work. So it's for people like this that are maybe frustrated or burnt out that this 12-fold chain is for. This is the 12-fold chain of dependent co-origination at a distance. And so you can see all of the different rungs of the ladder, or spokes of the wheel here. And we're going to go into each one of these this evening. And I invite you here to ask questions about it, you know, ask questions about these as we go. So the first one on this 12-fold chain is called ignorance. What do you think ignorance is referring to? What do you think ignorance is referring to? I just want to open that up for you all.
To me, it's the lack of insight.
Lack of insight? Lack of insight about anything in particular?
I think a certain subject, that, a lot of people know about, but you may not. So it's not kind of like a slam, saying you're ignorant, but, uneducated in that area, if that makes sense.
Yes. I think that's a common perception of this word ignorance, that it's about something. It could be, so for what you're saying is that it could be across the board any particular subject that you're lacking knowledge in. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Any other thoughts on that word ignorance? What that could be possibly referring to? Go ahead, unmute yourself, Navan.
I'm not sure what your word to use. How we see the world, we think we see it, but we really don't.
Mm-hmm.
That's very unclear. So
okay, so how we see the world. How we see the world,
and
we
how
think it's
our work, how things work in the world.
How things work in the world, and that may. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yeah. How we see the world, and perhaps that's some mistaken view there.
Yes,
Ignorance is a mistaken view of the world.
Yeah, our viewpoint is, our views are.
Mm-hmm.
I know words very well. Sorry.
No, that's good. I'm glad you all brought up some good points. So I think this is why I wanted to ask you the question, like when we see, because we can find a lot of information about the 12-fold chain of dependent coordination online. But when we see the word ignorance, there's going to be maybe some preconceptions of what ignorance means based on our cultural understanding of ignorance, based on our language. So from the perspective of this particular teaching, ignorance is actually referring to ignorance of the Four Noble Truths specifically.
Oh.
Or ignorance of the Buddha's teachings specifically not aware of. So you're correct in saying that ignorance is ignorance of something in particular, of something. I would just add that in this case, it's ignorance of something in particular, and that ignorance, it's not across the board kind of ignorance, it's ignorance specific to Buddhism. So not being aware of the Buddha's teaching. And like Navab was saying, the way that we see the world, I think that the Buddha is kind of getting at that too, with the Dharma. He's pointing at that. But we can, when we look at that word ignorance here, that's the kind of the base, the foundational meaning. There may be other meanings for that word ignorance, but that's one we can that's bedrock. So the second link on the chain is called action. All right, so action. What do you think action is referring to? What is action? Seems pretty obvious, but maybe just
What we do in the world, or
what we do,
how we act in the world, respond to.
How we, okay.
to people, places, and things. And
And then I would just ask you to maybe clarify a little bit more, like how we respond to things in terms of what.
would that be how? If someone has an argument, how am I going? Okay, that's how I would say it. If I have an argument with somebody, how am I responding to that person? I have a choice to
Uh-huh.
respond in a different manner
Okay.
with
So
more skilled. Yes, more
okay.
skilled
Okay.
being on
Right. Okay. So
behavior
yeah,
response.
yeah. That's that's one way to look at action, right? It's just, so if we take action by itself, certainly I could see that kind of interpretation here, right? If we take action as a word by itself, just like ignorance as a word by itself. So I'm going to press you to think a little bit more on this word action. So
Karma.
action here is also another way of referring to karma. And it's a specific kind of action. It's not any kind of action, but action that comes out of ignorance. Okay, so the first link of the chain is ignorance. What comes out of ignorance, any kind of action that, or whatever it is that comes out of ignorance, is referred to as action or karma. And specifically our negative karma, our mistaken deeds. So action in this case is the sum of all of our past actions, or all of our past wrong deeds, mistaken deeds, the sum of that. And those actions arise out of ignorance. So I don't know, I just put up a question mark here if you have any other examples of how that might be. And like you mentioned, Navab, about, I think you said something about getting into an argument.
And being skillful with your response.
Being skillful with your response. How about like a mistake? And anybody, feel free, anybody can respond to this, but what could another example be of action that's based in ignorance? So what you're saying, Navab, is action based in perhaps a more compassionate, way of seeing, skillful way of seeing. But what about an unskillful way of seeing, or an action based on ignorance? Any examples you can think of there?
Anyone else?
To me, a negative action would be, reacting without knowing, all of the factors, kind of like being falsely accused. I don't know if that makes sense either, but
yeah, so reacting without very much consciousness. I'm thinking also, one example that comes to my mind is, say, for example, somebody who, and I don't want to shame anybody here, but I'm just thinking of smoking, right? So smoking a cigarette would be an action, and you might feel good based on that action, but it most likely is an action based in ignorance of the Buddha's teachings. So the fifth precept has to do with not taking intoxicants, for example. And nicotine is a kind of toxin. It clouds the way that we see the world. So that would be maybe one example of an action based in ignorance. It might feel good, but it's still based in ignorance. Okay, and then the third link is called consciousness. So again, I want to invite you all to think about this one. What do you think consciousness is referring to?
Awareness? Oh,
Yeah, awareness.
Hmm.
Yeah, awareness. Okay. So,
Okay.
you know, action and action, the consciousness is coming out of action that is based in ignorance, right? So these, it's like one precedes after the other. And these are coming in, you know, this isn't something that takes like, okay, well, first I'm gonna, you know, enter into ignorance, and then 10 minutes later there is some action based off of ignorance, and then 10 minutes after that there's consciousness about that. This is all happening in moments, in a split of a second. So it's coming from this understanding that we are not blank slates, that we have within us all kinds of prejudices that are based in ignorance. We're full of prejudices, and when we see the world, we're looking through a colored lenses. And so consciousness is the sum total of our awareness, beginning from our birth, or perhaps even further back than that. And another way of thinking of consciousness in this is alaya vijnana, is the Buddhist word for what's called the storehouse consciousness. This is the place that all of the seeds are stored within us. All of the seeds of our past actions and our perceptions of the world are stored within us. So whatever happened in the past stays with us into the present moment. And here's one point that kind of makes a distinction between Buddhism and Hinduism. It's a fairly small distinction, but it's worth noting here, and that is that consciousness is not referring to a soul, or as in the Buddha's time, and even today in India, we talk about the Atman, this indestructible self that gets carried forward from one life to the next. So consciousness is not that, because consciousness is not a solid fixed thing. It's constantly in flux. It's changing too. So the next one, what comes after consciousness, is nama rupa, name and form. Name and form. So name is referring basically to mental constructs, and form is the external world, right? The physical world around us. The external world is form. So this is one link, nama rupa, name and form. Name is the mental world, and it refers to the things that are going on in our mind, right? Another way of talking about namarupa is the objects of the six senses. So that in Buddhism there are six senses, and just to be clear, the sixth sense is not referring to some like ESP or something like that. It's just from a Buddhist perspective, mind is also considered a sense organ, just like the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body. Those are all the senses. In the West, we talk about the five senses. In Buddhism, we talk about the six senses, because mind is included as one of the senses. So this is another way of referring to namarupa, name and form. And this comes from, right, this is drawn from consciousness. Consciousness arises, awareness, our perceptions arise, and out of this arises the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, our senses with which we perceive the world. So the six sense organs is what we just mentioned. All right. Now, when these six organs, these six sense organs connect with their objects, that's that's referred to as the next step on this 12-fold link, is contact. So, for example, the eye sees a rock, and when the eye sees the rock, the eye is the sense organ, and the rock is the object of the sense organ. And when those two come together with consciousness, those three come together. So there's eye, there's the rock, and then there's awareness, there's the consciousness of it. Then you have what's called contact. Right? This is one of the stages there, contact. Out of contact, once there's contact, so again, this is happening all in a split second. So you can snap your fingers and it's already happened, all of these. Out of this contact, once contact emerges, then you have a feeling, It could be a pleasurable feeling, or it could be a painful feeling based on that. It could be a neutral feeling too. It could be neither pleasure nor pain. When you see, like the eye sees a rock, maybe there's and this is based on our store consciousness, based on our past actions and perceptions, as well as our ignorance, right? What we're seeing there is based on what's happened in our past, since at least our birth, maybe before. So once there's contact, then feeling arises. You have a feeling that's either pleasurable, painful, or neutral. And then feeling leads to what's called craving, right? If it's something that is desirable, if it's something that leads to pleasure, then we have this desire for it. If it's something that leads to pain, then we have the desire to push it away. Now, out of craving is the next one, and that is grasping, to hold on, right? When you before, what precedes grasping is craving. You have to have that craving first. And we may not even be aware of the cravings that we have. We just grasp, right? Because these are happening split second, every instant. So we have a craving that arises, and then right after that is a grasping. You're grasping for that thing, or the pushing away of that thing. So grasping, this is an external thing that's happening, and the craving is internal. It's going on internally. And this is where the Four Noble Truths come into play. This is where we can pinpoint where the cause of suffering is, the second noble truth. So there is suffering. If there is suffering, the Buddha said, okay, well, if there's suffering, there's the cause of suffering. And this 12-fold chain is giving us an idea of how the mind works to generate suffering. And this is also where our practice comes into play. It's becoming aware of this dynamic of craving and grasping after things, becoming aware of it. This is where practice comes in. And this is one of the places, at least, where we can begin to break that chain, the chain of dependent co-arising. Grasping, once something is grasped, then it leads to what's the next link, which is called becoming. So our self is created through our actions, and grasping is another kind of activity. We become our thoughts and actions of yesterday. This is one of the first teachings in the Dhammapada, the earliest sayings of the Buddha. We become our thoughts and actions. And our becoming is dependent on what our cravings are, what we grasp after. This is what we become. So we have to, and even if we're not aware of what we're becoming, other people will be, or are. Other people sometimes know us better than we know ourselves. And this goes for both good kinds of, the things that that are nourishing, truly nourishing for ourselves, as well as those things that are destructive to ourselves. People can see ourselves sometimes better than we can see ourselves. Becoming Becoming leads to birth. Now I know I have a image of a baby here because it's connected with birth, but well, let's just say for this particular map of the mind, birth is a kind of more complete becoming. So we again, these are kind of like very fine distinctions between each other. Becoming leads to birth, and once you have birth, then you've got aging and death. And this aging and death is what the Buddha called suffering. So all of this is taking place in a split second from one model, from one way of thinking. There are other ways of perceiving this particular 12-fold chain, but I'm just going to give you that one right there and see if we have any questions coming up from that. And my information for this is basically coming from this particular book here.
Yes.
Basic Buddhist Concepts by Kogen Mizuno. So I just want to pause there and see. I mean, there's more that can be said about this 12-fold chain. It's perhaps more complex than I'm giving right now, but just like pause there and see what trickles in from your mind. If nothing, that's okay too.
Taixing, yeah, thank you for the slideshow. It's really well designed.
Thank you.
Yeah, very beautiful artwork with a lot of pictures.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious. I have two things. One is about the translation of name and form.
Mm.
So I don't know. I'm curious. It's because it's a very ancient usage of the original text. So are people comfortable with the translation? So why name leads corresponding to the mental part? Why the form is easier to understand? It's about physical things. Then name is it very people are comfortable with that translation? I'm just curious.
It's a good point. Yeah, there's multiple translations of these, and you look online and you can find different ways of you probably have to be a Sanskrit expert to understand the nuances of these different words.
Yeah, but it's a really good translation. It's very good translation. I'm just curious, in this culture, are people familiar with that kind of saying? Because Buddhism been to China thousands of years ago, and our ancient ancestors, they have already adopted that. So like the Tao Te Ching also use name. So the first sentence is the name that can be told is not the permanent name. So here name actually means the mental concepts, and so non-physical. So anything that can be named, that means give names to things, then this is it, that's conceptualization. So that's why that's called a name. So I'm just curious, people familiar with that? Or is it good?
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
Okay.
I can see where, though, Jay, I think you're raising a really good point. I can see where that might be problematic for some people, like the name. What is that referring to? Because, like you said, I don't think we have the same kind of way of thinking in English about name.
Larger, because basically it's one is physical, the other is mental, and so name has a larger extend the range covering all the mental field.
Hmm.
And another question is, have anybody heard about the cases, the reincarnation cases, the Virginia University Psychology Department has been doing? They collected like thousands of cases, reincarnation cases. One is, I remember, called James something. He's a local American, and he found himself to be a pilot in the World War II, used to be. Yeah, some very fascinating cases. They found like 200 of them are very solid evidence-based. You cannot explain that with other explanations. So, but their work hasn't been considered as mainstream work, although they have meticulously collected all this data. I don't know if many people are well known. It is well known to people here.
Yeah, I'm familiar with what you're talking about, Jay, and I'm glad you brought that up, because the 12-fold chain. So one way of thinking of it is that it's happening in every moment, all these 12. Another way that it's been conceived of is that it's taking place over the period of 3 lifetimes, right? So ignorance and action, and then consciousness leads to, it's, this is a previous life, and then it leads, kind of leading up to birth, old age, death, and suffering. So it's spanning across a life, more than one lifespan. Is another way to think about the 12-fold chain. That's a later. My understanding from based in this book is that particular version of it is a later version. But still, it's another way to think. And reincarnation is certainly a huge part of Buddhist thinking. And we kind of don't give it a lot of attention in I think for convert Buddhists, it's not given an awful lot of attention, I think. But if you read the sutras, a lot of them, all of them would refer to reincarnation.
When you're talking about reincarnation, I don't mean to make a segue, but it makes me think of the caste system in India. Does that kind of correlate at all, or no?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's also based in the idea that you're born into a caste based on a previous existence, and so you kind of if you're in a low caste, then well, that's your karma from a previous life. So that's one of that can be a problematic view. Actually, that's a very problematic view within Hinduism. And we also have to keep in mind that the Buddha disregarded caste in his time. He opened his community to all of the castes. So he didn't necessarily buy the whole caste system. Yeah.
My only exposure to this point of this concept of dependent origination has been very informal, probably most through Thich Nhat Hanh's writings, which tend to be quite poetic and maybe not with a lot of structure or concepts. And I have a feeling for the meaning behind his writing. It feels like the feeling is fairly clear. I'm interested to see this 12-fold structure explained, but I have to say it doesn't feel like it clarifies things for me. because there are so many concepts and I don't understand any of them.
Hmm.
So I kind of come back to the, kind of vague feeling I have that um, um, that our actions always have prior causes and conditions, and they don't cleanly land with our independent intention.
Hmm. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, dependent 12 links, or this is a very big topic. If basically we say the yanas, if we are familiar with the yana teachings, Hinayana, so dependent origination is about the whole scope of the Hinayana and the common paths of the Mahayana. So I remember when we studied it, it took like months to debate about one concept. What did that exactly mean? So a lot of details about that, and how it is related with the meditation practices, the 5 precepts, and the 10 virtues doings. It's related with karma, cause and effect, how you prove cause and effect, how you prove reincarnation, right? A lot of huge topic. So I guess if we want to completely explain that, there are very good commentaries about that. Maybe that's sick, and we still need to go into the details about that. And it's a huge topic, as Stephen said. Yeah, I agree with that. It's a real
Yeah, and I'm just
simple
giving
words
like a
of
big,
exploration.
yeah,
Yeah,
for totally. This is just like a bit, like a broad overview of the subject, and there's a lot of ways to look at it. There's also there's a Zen poem written by Sekito Kisen. Can't remember his Chinese name. But anyways, it's called Sando Kai in Japanese, the harmony of difference and equality. And it gives us also a perspective on this 12-fold chain. As far as meditation practice goes, I think it's very practical, actually. And I can't speak for anybody, but just as we enter, especially if we're, let's see, if we're thinking in terms of kind of meditation, and I'm just close after this because I know we're past our time here, but it brings us back to the reality of our senses, our sense organs. And oftentimes we're so lost in thought that we've lost awareness of our senses. So this is a way to train our minds to look back at our senses, become aware of our senses, and finely tune them so that we begin to notice, like, when there is a sound, we start to interpret it right away. But can we get to that place before the interpretation begins, where there's just sound? And so that would be contact. And then out of contact comes feeling. Can we sense the feeling that sound evokes, whether it's a pleasurable or unpleasurable or neutral? Can we detect a feeling? Is there any thoughts, ideas about it? What is there any craving for that to be more regular or to stop, right? And then you can see grasping. So if we're looking really closely in Zazen, we can see the arising and the falling of this 12-fold chain happening, right? If we're looking really kind of focusing, fine-tune focusing, like under an electron microscope. It's like looking under an electron microscope at the phenomenon that are coming into our mind. So it's very microscopic level that we're seeing here. And just watching, you know, watch craving as it comes into birth, as it has its existence, and then as it goes into death, and the grief that accompanies the death of craving, right? And then we, you know, so that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing, is watching things arise and fall. Anyways, that's maybe too simplistic, but as far as meditation goes, I think it can be really practical, because it can help us to kind of notice our senses more deeply, notice what we're hearing, notice what we're feeling in our body, noticing our body, noticing smells, tastes. All of these things are possibilities for meditation. You know, even like eating food, there's the contact between the sense organ of the tongue and the object of the tongue, the food. There's that contact, and then there's a feeling that arises. There's thoughts and things that come about. There's craving for it, and then, you know, all of this, chewing the food, all of this is happening. This is all part of, you know, we can observe, we can meditate while we're eating too, when we're looking at it, at this, as opposed to how we usually eat, which is just gobble down the food. We like the taste, and we don't think, and we're having a conversation with somebody else. That's fine, but this gives us kind of opportunity to kind of really take notice of what's happening with our senses and how we're responding to them. And that's how we break that chain. That's how we cut the chain, where when we start to notice craving for things that are not in accord with the reality of the Four Noble Truths that create suffering. Anyways, that's a short version. I'm no expert on this, just to be honest. I haven't studied this. I haven't studied this nearly as deeply as others have, and it sounds like Jay's got a lot of good stuff on this as well. So I'd encourage, if you want to learn more. Yeah, and Jay put some things in the chat. Yeah, so check those out if you're interested in learning more about that. But yeah, this is just a beginning, right? It's just the beginning to kind of get a sense of this concept, basic Buddhist concept, because it comes up in so many areas of Buddhism. It comes up in the Yogacara school. It comes up in the Heart Sutra, and other places. So it's a helpful set of concepts to know about on even just like a basic level, right? Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all. It's so good to see you and sit with you.
Same here. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. May all beings be safe. May all beings be well. May all beings be happy.